Hi, I'm Mal from the Money Study, bringing you another episode in our You and Your Superannuation series, and we're now up to episode number 9, and we're talking about comparing your super fund perhaps with another, or if you've got more than a couple of super funds, perhaps looking at consolidation, tidying up all the bits and pieces that you've got in super. Before we get into the details, there's my disclaimer: facts and figures, information. This is not advice. So what's your fund like? And it's surprising, I do admit, that when I talk to some clients, they don't even know what fund they're in, which is not a good start. Hopefully you've got a bit of an idea, especially what fund you've got, to then work out, how does it really compare? Are you in a reasonable fund? Is it a good fund? Is it a bad fund? And so it goes on. And what do we mean by those terms of good and bad anyway? Because there are so many different issues and things to look at when you're trying to compare super. And of course, the government's brought out a few things where they've brought out this thing called My Super, which is effectively a portfolio that each super fund should have, so they can do a bit more of a comparison. It's got to have sort of standard options and so forth, so we can do a little bit more comparison. But even that tool, it's a little bit rough. So you've really got to, when you look at it closely, to understand what you are you indeed comparing apples with apples? Obviously, things like fees, we can go looking on our statement for the costs in fees, and of course there are a number of different fees. It's not just your administrative fee, which generally speaking is a small component of the overall fees. Generally speaking, it's the investment fee, which is quite often a percentage of your investment. And so obviously, if you've only got a small amount of money, an investment fee may not be a big cost. But if you've got $500,000 or $1 million, then obviously it makes a big difference where you've been charged 0.5 or 0.8 or 1.2 as a percentage of your overall balance. So have a look closely at what the fees are and how do those fees change as your balance change. Obviously, it's performance and it's history, what it's done over time. I'm not fussed really by what a fund does in 1 year. All funds tend to have their day in the sun at some point when their investment style comes to the fore. What I'd rather see is consistency. So what I'm really looking for is the performance of a super fund over ideally at least 10 years. And if you can find 20-year figures, I reckon that's even better. But those sort of figures are very hard to find unless you actually go digging on each individual website. But certainly the performance, as you hear the whole story, past performance is not an indication of future performance and so forth. But you've got to start somewhere. If a fund has got a good track record over a long period of time, then generally speaking, you can say, okay, these guys have got it together. But I say, don't look at figures over 1 year and keep on changing funds for a fund that did well last year. We're looking for consistency in performance. Insurances, most super funds will provide you or offer you similar sorts of insurances with the death cover, with the TPD, total permanent disability, and generally a income protection cover as well. Those fees the premiums for those insurances will vary, and some of the clauses of what makes a good claim also vary. So if you are in the situation where insurances are certainly important to you, you might want to have a very close look at what these insurances offerings are. Most of the super funds are not the insurers. Most super funds will go out to tender and get a insurance company to do the insurance for them. So you may even find that the super fund is changing insurance companies every 5 years or so, depending on how often they redo their contract with the insurance company. But certainly be careful if you've got insurance and you are considering moving from one super fund to another, that yes, money rolls across, but not the insurances. So always be careful of the insurances. If you're ever going to roll super funds from one to another, you would always apply for the insurance that you want in the new fund. First, get approved from that insurance first, before you would do the rollover, because the money would come across but not the insurances. What we don't want to happen is effectively to roll over and then find out that you have been knocked back on the insurance in the new company. Get approved first before you do any rollover in regards to insurances. The portfolio options vary dramatically from fund to fund. Some of the funds have got very basic options, a bit like the PSS AP, not picking on that fund, but it does only have 4 options. It's got an aggressive, it's got a balanced, a conservative and a cash option, which for many people is quite sufficient, giving you 4 options. But if you're a little bit interested or you want a little bit more control, some of the other funds certainly have a lot more options. They might provide you with these, what they call those pre-mixed, the growth, the balanced and so forth. But they also might provide what is called asset classes. So you could invest in Australian shares, international shares, property, fixed interest, infrastructure perhaps. So you can sort of, if you've got an inclination as to thinking that Australia is going to outperform the rest of the world or vice versa, you can actually put more money into those different asset classes. So a bit more control. And some of the bigger industry style funds especially will offer you what's called direct investment options. Where effectively you can even have shares in Commonwealth Bank or Rio or the mining sector, the gold index, or any of these ETFs and all these other sort of a little bit more down to the level of a share, and you can actually do that inside your industry super fund without having to spend thousands going to a self-managed super fund, which is the main reason that most people do that, is to get control over the investment. These days, a lot of the big industry super funds are offering those choices as well. So if you are interested in how your money is invested, a lot more control. If you want more control, go looking for a super fund that would actually give it to you. And of course, if you've got a bit of an ethical bent, as to you want to ensure that your money is only invested in ethical things or sustainable, have a look at what your fund is indeed actually investing in comparison to other funds. Some funds offer a bit of extra education, which I think is wonderful. And some of it's pretty basic, as I've seen, but some of it's good. These days, I say it's a case of hunting around to find good education, and hopefully these videos are part of the deal. But if your fund has what they call a member service manager who comes around to your workplace or whatever and provides education, I think that's a lovely service. I used to do that for a super fund years ago, and used to head out to the back of New South Wales and go to little organisations and sit down and have a chat. And it was probably the first time some of these people had ever seen someone from a super fund. So good service if provided by some of the super funds there. And of course, what are their service standards like? I'm pretty disappointed pretty much with super funds and the ability to talk to them easily. Most of the super funds don't even do their own administration. You'll find that a lot of the funds use the same people for the administration, so they just have a different phone number. So when you ring up, you've got a dedicated team from that organisation, but they're not part of the super fund. They are just an administrative team answering the phone lines and so forth. So, and some of the super funds, you really can't even call on. You're waiting, and then they'll tell you, we'll get back to you, email them, they'll tell you they'll get back to you within 48 hours. I think that's appalling, really, in this day and age. But anyway, find out what your super fund's doing and do a bit of comparison as far as service standards is concerned. How do you do a comparison? There are quite a few websites available these days that will provide you with comparison information on super funds. CanStar, if you just Googled CanStar super comparison, it'll come up with this website. And I haven't chosen any funds here specifically. I've just taken the top 3 in alphabetical order. But again, even though this information is there, you can click on and get more information and so forth, which is great. But you've really got to make sure that you are indeed comparing apples with apples, because if you just looked at those three there and you see, oh, Aware's done 8% there, over that 5-year period, where Australian Super's only done 7, you think, oh, Aware's a better fund. But you've got to look there at what they're talking about, in the fact that Aware Super is they're talking about their high growth option. So that's got to look, generally speaking, would have more exposure to shares than Australian Super balanced option. So it's not really, to me, a good apples with apples. I mean, Australian Super certainly does have a high growth option, and it'd be interesting then to see the comparisons on high growth compared to high growth, and vice versa, balance to balance, and so forth. Whatever, look at the portfolio that matches you, and we will be talking about portfolios, what these high growth and balance and so forth mean in a future episode. But yeah, just don't, when you look at these websites and things, don't just look at the numbers. Make sure the numbers relate to exactly the same thing when you are comparing. But this Canstar, I think, has got over 50 super funds on that website that you can do a comparison. There's another good website called Review My Super, and you can even log into your MyGov account. And on your MyGov, there's a Compare My Super tab, in which case you can then compare your super fund that you've already got to some other funds, and to give you some good information on that as well. So there's no excuse really for just staying in your own fund. Do a bit of homework, and to really find out, how does your fund actually compare for all these different things that we have indeed been talking about here. And so, yeah, we've got to consider the investment returns. We spoke about the insurance. Is there an exit fee to roll over? Generally speaking, the answer to that is no. Exit fees and entry fees have sort of tended to disappear over the last decade or so. Once upon a time, some of the older super funds, if you've still got an old AMP perhaps, or some of these, retail funds like Colonial and these sort of ones, they did have disgusting exit fees, because if you left, the poor old financial planner that set that up misses out on future commissions, and the exit fee is sort of to compensate for that. No, come on. Anyway, be wary that some of the old products do indeed may still have an exit fee there. Now, if you've got a fund like what they call an untaxed fund, when you've got funds like the PSS, CSS, the DFRDB, some of the uni supers and so forth, there's some funds there that have got some untaxed components. If you ever do then cash, you got to retirement or so forth, and then you decided to roll out your benefit from one fund to another, but it's coming from a fund that had some untaxed components, yes, you will indeed have that money taxed as it leaves the fund. So don't blame the fund, your new fund or your old fund. It's literally a component that was never taxed in the first place. It gets taxed as it leaves that old fund, as it goes into your new one. Now, you can certainly download a rollover form to do this. So you could download the form either from either fund, but generally speaking, you would, if you're going to download a form, then you certainly would ideally fill it out from the fund that you're going to. They want your money, and they will try and process this thing pretty quickly. If you send a rollover form to the fund you're leaving, they're not quite so keen to see your money go. And of course, you don't even have to use a form these days. Generally speaking, the quickest and easiest way to do a consolidation of super, rolling one fund to another, is effectively just go into your MyGov site. It should show you all of your super funds. If you've provided tax file numbers and so forth, and everything matches up with names and tax file numbers, you should be able to see all of your super funds on your MyGov site. And on that, there's a consolidate button. You can literally select which fund you want to go to which one, hit the button, and off it goes. Okay. But I remember to say, be careful of insurances. Be careful you're not missing out on losing some sort of benefit. Just make sure you understand what you've got before you hit that button. Don't just blindly consolidate into the fund that you perhaps now got with your new employer, thinking, oh, that's nice and easy. You've got choice of super these days, generally speaking. So, if your employer's offered you a fund, do you want to use it? Compare it to the one that you've got from your previous employment, or compare it to a brand new one. And do your homework. If you look at all these comparison websites and your head's starting to spin and you really don't understand what it's all about, then we're not allowed to recommend a product to you, but we can certainly help you understand the differences between the different comparisons. If you've got some ones that you're thinking before you want to do it, and you just want to make sure, are we comparing apples with apples and so forth, and what some of the finer details mean, we're more than happy to help you understand it. We don't tell you what fund to go to. That's a product recommendation, and we certainly can't do that, but we certainly can assist you to understand what the meanings of some of these information's all about. Hope that helped, and hope we might see you on another episode.